Think about this honestly. What happens to a man after he says I do? His world quietly contracts. Friends drift away. Freedom turns into responsibility. His time, once his own, becomes rationed between obligations he never consciously agreed to. His money stops being his and becomes ours, though our decisions rarely feel mutual. None of this happens by accident. It's a social mechanism disguised as love. Marriage isn't the celebration of union. It's the institutionalization of control. The brilliance of the system is that it convinces men they are choosing it freely. They aren't coerced. They are conditioned. They enter the cage smiling, believing they've found purpose, when in truth they've signed away their sovereignty. And the most tragic part? Society applauds their surrender as virtue. What if marriage is not the fulfillment of manhood, but the silent process of erasing it? Number 1, women's love is conditional, based on a man's utility. Love, for men, is often taught as unconditional, but in reality, female love operates on a strict economy of value. It flows toward utility, not essence. A woman doesn't fall in love with who a man is. She falls in love with what he provides. His income, his competence, his status, his emotional labor. These are the currencies that sustain her attraction. The moment those assets decline, so does the affection. Modern romance hides this truth behind poetic language, but biology keeps the books honestly. Women, by evolutionary design, are investors. Their love is conditional because their survival once depended on the resources and stability a man could offer. That ancient instinct never disappeared. It merely evolved into a modern strategy. When she says, I love you, the unspoken clause is, as long as you remain useful. If he loses his job, his drive, or his social value, the emotional withdrawal begins. Subtly at first, then decisively. What she once called support transforms into criticism. What was once desire becomes duty. Statistics confirm what instinct already knows. 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women. And they don't leave because they're miserable. They leave when the cost-benefit ratio tips in their favor. They stay as long as the transaction serves them, and exit once a better option or greater independence appears. The romantic narrative says, she fell out of love. The economic reality says, the deal expired. This doesn't make women villains. It makes them strategic. Love, for them, is not the opposite of logic. It is logic in emotional form. They optimize relationships the way nature trained them to. Seek security, extract value, and move when diminishing returns appear. The tragedy is that most men mistake this for betrayal instead of recognizing it as programming. They take it personally when it's simply biological math. The problem isn't that women love conditionally. The problem is that men keep expecting them not to. Men project their version of loyalty, self-sacrificing, idealistic, absolute, onto beings wired for pragmatic affection. They build their entire sense of worth on being loved forever, when in reality, love lasts only as long as value does. To understand this truth isn't to grow bitter, it's to grow lucid. When a man sees love as a conditional exchange, he stops begging for permanence and starts building power. He stops chasing affection and starts increasing value. And ironically, that's when women find him most irresistible. Not because he loves less, but because he finally stopped needing love to define him. Number 2, marriage as the slow erasure of male freedom. Look closely at what happens to most men after marriage. Their lives begin to shrink, not expand. The social circles that once gave them energy fade into the background. Nights out with friends turn into immature behavior. Hobbies that once brought joy are rebranded as selfish distractions. Even solitude, once a source of reflection and strength, becomes suspicious, something a wife interprets as emotional distance. Slowly, imperceptibly, the man's world becomes smaller until it fits neatly inside the expectations of the relationship. This transformation isn't accidental, it's structural. Society and biology work together to convert male freedom into relational stability. Women intuitively understand that a man who has no alternatives becomes more predictable, more compliant, and more willing to invest. The fewer exits he sees, the more he'll decorate his cage. So, piece by piece, decision by decision, his independent existence is dismantled. Not through open confrontation, but through 1,000 small concessions that all feel reasonable. At first, it seems harmless. He gives up a night out to keep the peace. He agrees to spend less time on his personal projects because family comes first. He lets her handle the finances because she's better at managing money. Each compromise feels logical in isolation, but collectively, they create a silent system of control, one in which the man cooperates in his own domestication. What makes this system so effective is that it disguises control as care. When a wife says, "I just want us to spend more time together," it sounds loving. When she says, "Maybe you shouldn't hang out with them anymore," it sounds protective. But behind the warmth lies a deeper psychological strategy. Remove his independence by reframing it as selfishness. The man who used to navigate life with autonomy now seeks permission to exist. Over time, his schedule, finances, and social life all orbit around her preferences. His weekends are planned according to her comfort. His money funds her sense of security. His decisions must pass through her emotional filter. And because he genuinely loves her, he tells himself this is partnership, when in reality, it's containment. The most tragic part is how willingly men participate. They've been trained to equate sacrifice with love, to measure their worth by how much they give up. They call it maturity, responsibility, commitment. But beneath those noble words lies the quiet erosion of freedom, a freedom that once defined their identity as men. By the time he realizes what's happened, it's already too late. The cage is comfortable now. It has family photos on the wall, shared bank accounts, and the illusion of mutual happiness. But deep down, something fundamental has been traded. Autonomy for approval, sovereignty for security. And the worst part? He'll defend the very system that captured him, because admitting the truth would mean confronting his own collaboration in his captivity. Marriage, for many men, isn't the celebration of a love they imagined. It's the gradual surrender of selfhood, disguised as devotion. Number 3. The system exploits men through their virtues. The brilliance of the marriage system lies in how it weaponizes men's best qualities against them. A man's sense of duty, loyalty, and selflessness, the very traits that make him valuable, are converted into tools of his own subjugation. Society has perfected a form of psychological alchemy. It turns masculine virtue into voluntary servitude. A husband doesn't need to be forced into submission. He convinces himself that submission is love. From childhood, men are taught that their worth depends on what they provide, not who they are. Be reliable. Be strong. Put others first. These lessons sound noble, but within the framework of marriage, they become a trap. The more a man gives, the less he owns of himself. The phrase "happy wife, happy life" isn't wisdom. It's programming. It teaches men to measure their success, not by inner fulfillment, but by how effectively they can manage a woman's emotions. His peace becomes conditional on her satisfaction. His identity becomes dependent on her mood. What begins as devotion quietly mutates into obedience. He learns to preempt her disappointment, to anticipate her needs before she voices them. He apologizes before he's even done anything wrong, because keeping the peace feels safer than asserting truth. Over time, the man internalizes the idea that discomfort equals failure, that if she's unhappy, he's at fault. This dynamic doesn't create harmony. It creates hierarchy. One partner's emotions rule, the other's existence revolves. The cruelty of this setup is its subtlety. The man believes he's being a good husband, a caring father, a responsible provider. But beneath those noble labels lies a simple truth. He's been conditioned to thank the system that exploits him. He doesn't rebel because rebellion feels immoral. He doesn't question because questioning feels unloving. The more virtuous he tries to be, the deeper the chains sink. This is the hidden genius of social conditioning. It teaches men to participate in their own erasure and call it maturity. It replaces the pursuit of self-mastery with the pursuit of approval. And because men crave purpose, they willingly redirect that energy toward service, mistaking servitude for meaning. Marriage, then, isn't just a partnership. It's a moral theater where men prove their virtue through sacrifice. But true virtue doesn't demand self-erasure. A man's love loses its value when it comes from guilt instead of freedom, when it's driven by fear of disapproval rather than strength of choice. The moment he believes that peace is more important than truth, he stops being a man and starts being a manager of someone else's happiness. Number 4, the biological and evolutionary roots of female behavior. To understand the behavioral shift in women after marriage, you have to look beyond morality and into biology. What men interpret as inconsistency, affection turning to control, passion fading into duty, is in fact an evolutionary strategy millions of years in the making. During courtship, the female instinct seeks to attract. After commitment, it seeks to secure. Attraction demands charm and compliance. Security demands control and stability. The same woman who once seduced now manages. What men call change is simply the switch from mating strategy to survival strategy. In the early phase, everything is abundance, sex, affection, admiration. This is the investment stage, designed to hook his commitment. Once she senses his devotion is locked in, the biological calculus changes. The body and mind shift from acquisition mode to maintenance mode. Sex becomes a reward for compliance rather than a spontaneous expression of desire. Her attention narrows from what makes him happy to what keeps this arrangement stable. The playfulness fades, replaced by emotional management and subtle authority. None of this is malicious, it's instinct. Nature programs women to maximize reproductive security, not romance. In ancient terms, a woman's survival, and that of her offspring, depended on extracting consistent resources from a single provider. Modern marriage simply gives that instinct a legal and social framework. The rings, vows, and ceremonies are the polished armor of a primal transaction. Exchange intimacy for security, then manage the source of that security. Men mistake this for deceit because they approach love idealistically. They expect permanence in passion, equality in power, and constancy in behavior. Illusions incompatible with biological design. When a woman reduces intimacy, raises demands, and increases emotional control, she isn't betraying love. She's obeying programming. Her instincts optimize for safety, not excitement. The tragedy is that men don't see the pattern. They personalize it. They blame themselves for the decline, double their efforts, and unknowingly feed the very mechanism that drains them. The harder they try to please, the faster the polarity dies. They think love can be negotiated, but biology doesn't bargain. Understanding this isn't cynicism, it's clarity. When a man accepts that female behavior follows evolutionary incentives, he stops being confused by emotional contradictions. He realizes that nature rewards strength, independence, and selective investment, not appeasement. The man who understands this doesn't resent women. He simply stops misinterpreting instinct as intimacy. Number 5. The emotional trap of society, turning sacrifice into virtue. No man enters marriage expecting to lose his voice. Yet that's exactly what happens, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The process isn't physical, it's psychological. It begins with a single compromise. It's not worth arguing about. Then another. She's probably right. Over time, those tiny concessions accumulate, until silence becomes his default language. He learns that peace has a price, and that price is self-expression. At first, he believes he's choosing harmony, but what he's really choosing is submission dressed as maturity. Each time he swallows his frustration, each time he suppresses an honest thought, he reinforces the unspoken rule. Her comfort matters more than his truth. The result is a subtle transformation. The man who once led, decided, and asserted becomes the man who pleases, agrees, and adapts. This is how the domestication of the male mind occurs, not through force, but through conditioning. Every argument avoided feels like wisdom. Every boundary surrendered feels like love. He mistakes the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. But it's not peace. It's psychological captivity. The more he avoids confrontation, the more he loses the ability to confront anything at all. Eventually, he stops thinking of himself as an individual and starts viewing himself as a function, the emotional shock absorber of the relationship. He regulates her moods, carries her worries, filters his words to protect her feelings. And when the exhaustion sets in, he doesn't rebel. He rationalizes. All marriages are like this. It's just compromise. He mistakes compliance for character. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. When repeated emotional defeats train someone to stop resisting, even when escape is possible. The married man lives this daily. He no longer argues because experience has taught him that resistance leads to guilt, withdrawal, or emotional punishment. His silence becomes self-defense. His obedience becomes instinct. In time, a darker transformation occurs, what could be called domestic Stockholm syndrome. He begins to identify with the very system that confines him. He starts defending the imbalance that drains him, even mocking other men who question it. His mind protects his cage by calling it love. By the end, he's no longer the man he was. His independence has been traded for stability, his leadership for peace, his authenticity for acceptance. And he tells himself it's worth it because admitting otherwise would mean facing the unbearable truth. He wasn't tamed by his wife. He was tamed by his own fear of losing her. Number 6. The path to liberation, reclaiming psychological sovereignty. Freedom doesn't begin with rebellion. It begins with awareness. The man who understands how the system works is no longer its prisoner. Liberation isn't about abandoning women or rejecting love. It's about reclaiming psychological sovereignty, the right to think, feel, and choose without being emotionally blackmailed. The goal isn't to hate the feminine, but to stop worshiping it. Only then can a man see love clearly, without illusion or dependence. The first step is independence. Not just financial, but emotional. A man who cannot regulate his own emotions will always be ruled by someone else's. As long as his peace depends on her approval, he will live as a servant dressed as a partner. Building independence means cultivating an internal fortress, purpose, discipline, and solitude strong enough to withstand emotional storms. When you no longer fear being alone, you become impossible to control. The second step is redefining purpose. Men are taught to find meaning in service, to be useful to others before being true to themselves. But purpose that begins in servitude ends in resentment. True direction comes from mastery, from building something that reflects your essence, not your obligations. When a man lives for his mission instead of a relationship, women orbit his gravity instead of draining it. Finally, the awakened man must learn to love without attachment. Real love is a choice, not a need. When you no longer chase validation, affection becomes genuine rather than transactional. You can give without losing, care without clinging, and walk away without bitterness. The paradox is that women respect this kind of man most, the one who doesn't need them, yet chooses them consciously. This is the ultimate freedom. Not isolation, but clarity. It's the ability to engage in love without surrendering sovereignty. To stand beside a woman, not beneath her approval. To treat marriage not as a destiny, but as an option that must earn its place in your life. When a man no longer seeks completion through another, he becomes complete himself. And from that completeness, he can finally experience what love was meant to be. Not dependency disguised as devotion, but two free beings choosing each other without fear. Because the truth is simple, only the man who doesn't need love can ever experience real love. If this message challenged what you've been taught, good. Growth always begins with discomfort. Share this truth, start conversations, and help more men see what's really happening beneath the surface of happily ever after. Your voice matters. Use it. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Like the video if it woke something in you. Subscribe to the channel and share it, so more men can finally open their eyes. This isn't just content, it's consciousness. Spread it.